Greetings, people of the internet. This is Scott with Serkworks Art Labs. Welcome once again to the underground lair where we create robots, aliens, zombies, and other imminent threats to humanity. And we're going to talk a little bit about zombies today. I'm going to do some quick and dirty zombie sketches while I kind of go over a little topic that's something that's on my mind, something that's, you know, a new discovery, something I found at a local comic book store, kind of got me a little up in arms, and I want to share it with you. Let's see. So what is it? What could it be? What could it be that sparked this whole video? Well, I found this on my local comic book store rack. Ghoul Scouts, Night of the Living Undead. Does it look eerily familiar to my comic, Young and the Dead? No zombies allowed? Could it be? Could this comic have ripped me off? Could they have stolen my idea? We're going to talk a little bit about ideas, where they come from. Did they take my idea? You know, I don't know, man. It's really weird, but we're going to talk about it. I'm going to do some quick sketches, like I said, and we're going to get to the bottom of this. So, the question is, do I think the creators of Ghoul Scouts, Night of the Living Undead, stole the idea for their comic from my comic, Young and the Dead, No Zombies Allowed? No, absolutely not. I really don't think they probably are totally unaware of my comic. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, because I think a lot of, I was going to say younger artists, but that's probably not younger artists. A lot of maybe more inexperienced artists, or I don't know, just people that maybe have come up with this notion that, you know, they're just worried about putting their artwork out in the world because they're afraid somebody's going to steal it. And I've heard a lot of people talk about that, and I don't know, that's not really something I concern myself with too much, because, you know, ideas are sort of a dime a dozen. You know, these, you know, general ideas, these concepts that we come up with. If you look, other people have already more than likely come up with something similar, but I think it's more the way you tell the story. And, you know, two people can come up without any kind of copying or ripping somebody off. Two people can come up with a very similar idea or a very similar concept independently of each other. And, you know, there's and there's terms for it. I think, you know, multiple discovery, parallel thinking, but there's tons of examples, you know, throughout history. Like calculus was created by like two different people separately of each other. They both came up with that same basic concept of how, you know, how calculus works. Same thing with railroads. A number of people were, just because of the demand for that, were coming up with the idea for railroads at the same exact time. The telephone, telegraph, Alexander Graham Bell. So there's a story, there's an article by Malcolm Gladwell, I think it's the Annals of Invention, who says ideas are rare, or big ideas are rare. And I don't want to give the impression that I think my idea for Young and the Dead is this huge idea, all right? But anyway, so Malcolm Gladwell is telling this story in his article, and I'll leave a link to it. But so Alexander Graham Bell kind of came up with his eureka moment for, you know, the telegraph he was kind of overlooking this bluff over this river, and, you know, thinking, you know, how can I communicate with people across this river? And then that's kind of when he had his eureka moment. And in the article, Malcolm Gladwell said, well, if Alexander Graham Bell would have fallen off that bluff into the river and drowned, the telegraph, the telephone, it would have still been invented, and it wouldn't have like taken a lot longer for it to be invented, because somebody else, and I don't remember the name, and that can kind of go towards the story that I'm about to relay, paraphrase. But there was another inventor that was coming up with this, basically the same concept, independently of Alexander Graham Bell, you know, somewhere else. And believe it or not, both inventors presented their ideas at the same exhibition. So, and, you know, I think the other guy's name was Gray. I don't remember his first name, but I even heard that like his way of developing the telegraph was even better than Alexander Graham Bell's, but whether it was, you know, cult of personality or whatever, Alexander Graham Bell gave the better presentation, and it was more memorable, and that's kind of the one that took off, and you know, when you pick up your cell phones nowadays, that's who you have to thank for. But, you know, just because just because one person has an idea doesn't mean that another person can't have that very similar idea. And it's not just with inventions and things, it also goes with creative works. When J.K. Rowling first published Harry Potter, there were a number of people that just kind of came out of the woodwork and like were suing her, saying that she stole their idea. I mean, there's if you go look, on the internet, there's tons of stories like this. But there was one person who had a novel called The Legend of Ra and the Muggles. I mean, even the word Muggles was in it. And this person had another story with a character named Larry Potter. And so she was suing J.K. Rowling, and there were some other ones. I forgot what the other one was. I think there was another one called The Adventures of Willy the Wizard. And these were from, in the 80s. I think the Legend of Ra and the Muggles was in 84, and the Willy the Wizard was in 87. But it was ruled they didn't win the lawsuit because at least for the first one with the Muggle thing, it wasn't, that book wasn't even published, and they just figured there was no way that she would have known that. And and that's not the only one. There was also Neil Gaiman. I'm sure you guys know Neil Gaiman if you're into comic books, but he had a comic book in the 90s called Timothy Hunter, and he was a boy sorcerer. He had black hair, he had glasses, he even had a pet owl. Now, did Gaiman try to sue J.K. Rowling? No, because he realized that that people can have similar ideas, and that his idea wasn't totally original in itself. It was inspired by something else, and we're all inspired by other creators. He was inspired by a book called The Journal of Luke Kirby, which was inspired by T.H. White's The Once and Future King, which is like the a King Arthur story. And these all kind of come from there. And you would think, when you think about it, you're like, well, wow, that is really a coincidence. Dark hair, Gaiman's character, dark hair, glasses, even had the pet owl. But when you think about, well, if you're gonna give a wizard kid a pet, well, what would it be? Well, you could go with a black cat or something, or I don't think bats make very good pets, but so you kind of gravitate towards an owl. So it's not really that unusual when you think about it. It's not really that uncanny that two people would come up with that same idea. And like I said, Neil Gaiman, being a creator, understood this, so he's not, and that's kind of what I'm trying to say right now, is that I almost know for a fact that the people that created the Ghoul Scouts are probably have never even seen my comic book. So we're all inspired by the works of others. I was inspired by for my comic book, I was inspired by movies like Goonies and E.T. and Explorers, Monster Squad. Stories where the kids were the heroes. And and there's stories today, obviously, where kids are heroes, like we just talked about Harry Potter, and you've got Hunger Games and things like that. But the difference is, the stories back then, the kids, these were just ordinary kids. They weren't like Harry Potter, where you had magical powers and things like that. Or Katniss Everdeen, she's she doesn't have superpowers, but she might as well. she's like an expert marksman, and she does super heroic things that so. But back in the 80s, there's just a number of movies and things like that were just these ordinary kids put in these extraordinary situations, and that's kind of what I base my story on. And also I was a big fan of horror movies, and it really depends on the type of horror that I'm into. I was never really big into slashers, but I always loved more creepy stuff or more like Universal style monsters, and that's why when I always say that my comic book's like Goonies meets Night of the Living Dead, but it really is. It's probably a lot closer to Monster Squad, but it's not. Monster Squad's a little more of a cult classic, and not as many people know about it. So when you mention that, they don't make that connection. But Monster Squad was basically these ordinary kids who fight like the classic Universal style monsters like Dracula and Frankenstein and the Creature from the Black Lagoon and all that. And of course they had taken all the cool monsters, so what was left was zombies. So I'm thinking, well, I could do a zombie kid story. So the idea isn't all that original, but it's the way we tell our stories. And I think if you were to read Young and the Dead, there's different takes on the way the zombies behave and things like that, and if you look at the two books, if you look at Young and the Dead and you look at Ghoul Scouts, I mean, on the surface, sure, you look at the covers, there's kids getting ready to bracing themselves or preparing to battle against some zombies, and you got kind of hands coming out from the sides in both. I mean, the covers are very similar, and that itself is probably a trope. I'm sure, I don't know anywhere in particular where I may have gotten the idea for that particular composition, but I'm sure I pulled it from, it could have been like an old eerie or creepy comics or something like that. I don't know, but it's not, I mean, we all take ideas and we've all seen stuff like that, so I'm sure that idea came from something else, and hence the similarities between the two covers, and then you look at, in my cover, they don't have weapons or anything at this point, but if you look at some of the other issues like the second issue and the third issue, you can kind of see you combine those, so they do on the surface look similar, but when you kind of get into it, there's a lot of differences. The way we tell our story is very different. I think mine gears a little older. I still like to say mine's all ages, but it might even be PG-13 today, but in the 80s it was just PG. Just like Goonies, and and the humor is that the humor's there, and mine takes place in the 80s. As far as I can tell, Ghoul Scouts takes place in modern times. It's a little difficult to tell because it's in it takes place on a campground, so we don't really see too much technology or anything, but as far as the hairstyles and things like that, it looks like it's probably modern times. So and there's this color, mine's black. There's you can just go into it. There's definitely so many more differences than there are similarities. So, and these two books, Young and the Dead and Ghoul Scouts, I mean, they're not alone. I mean, it's not like these are the only two books that are similar, or two stories or properties, intellectual properties out there that are similar. I mean, there's a few other things like that out, that I think last year there was a book called Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse, and I think before that it was actually called Scouts versus Zombies. So, similar to Ghoul Scouts, you've got a bunch of, scouts fighting zombies. But, if you see, I haven't seen the movie, I've seen the trailer. I might have to watch it because it looked interesting, but it's definitely, an R-rated movie. It's more of it's almost like instead of like Goonies fights or zombies or scouts, fighting zombies, or like a kid's style story, it's almost like a teenage sex comedy. It's almost like it looks more like Superbad meets fighting zombies or something. And then there's another movie out there called Cooties, which is kind of the reverse, where it's a bunch of adults and the kids are the zombies. The kids in a school succumb to some zombie virus, and then I think they shut down the school, quarantine or whatever, and the teachers are out, trying to fight the kids. So, and it's obviously that's more of a dark comedy. But I mean, there's so many different ways that you could take a similar idea and just the way you tell the story. I mean, and some of those movies aren't, those movies are modern time, but when you go back to, my love for this 80s nostalgia, I mean, there's a lot of stuff like that. Like, I just watched the first 2 episodes of the Netflix series Stranger Things. And so far it is just like right up my alley. I mean, if you look at this, there's a cover illustration that I found in this magazine, and it looks like Drew Struzan. I mean, it's just amazing, which kind of makes me think when I eventually get my book collected, I really would like to have Jeff Lafferty commission him to do like a sort of that 80s style, I don't know what you call it, but that composition, like you saw in all the 80s movies. If he'd do it, I don't know. Sometimes he's not crazy about doing certain commissions, but that would be kind of cool to have like a variant cover like that. But I'm getting a little off topic. But anyway, this 80s nostalgia, man, it's very, there's a lot of elements to all that stuff. So, and then not too long ago there was Super 8, and when and also this there's a book right now by Image called Paper Girls. which I'm really digging it. But I skipped an issue and I can't find it, so I'm kind of waiting till I can find it before I continue reading it. But it's really good. It does skew a little older, but it does have a lot of 80s nostalgia, and it's about these girls that are, they have a paper route and everything, and then it's an alien invasion story, and it's really good. So a lot of these people probably were inspired by similar things as me, and so they come out with books that are sort of similar, but they're very different. If you read them all, you can see that. Back to, and when Super 8 came out, I remember, because Young and the Dead was already, and this kind of, it's a little embarrassing to say because it's taken me so long to put these out, but my book came out before Super 8, and when Super 8 came out, it was almost like, oh man, there's a lot of stuff in there. I mean, they weren't fighting zombies, but there was the whole, one of the kids was making a zombie movie within the movie, so there was that, and there was just some similarities, and I was like, oh man, but then, when you really think about it again, it's so different. And I remember, if you guys follow like the 100s, the 100 Days of Making Comics, Mike Emmerich, who's a member of the 100s, who just, I think, wrapped up his or is getting close to wrapping up. He's wrapped up his second 100 Days of Making Comics stint. But he's got a comic that he's developing called Space Cat, and I remember in the beginning he discovered that there was another story out there called Space Cat, and he was kind of considering whether he wanted to do it or not, and I think a lot of people kind of steered him in the directions, and I think eventually he did the right thing and just kind of said, my book is going to be different. It's just the name, there may be some similarities, but and if you watch Mike's videos, you really get in his head as far as his process and how he creates things, and no one else is going to create a story like Mike. I mean, by just the way he's telling about it, it's all from him. It's all his experiences and just his way of creating, and no one else is going to tell that story. So don't worry so much about these tiny surface similarities. Your story's going to be different, and it's just as far as the name. There's an article which I'll try to remember to link to, but this is like the 5 most mind-blowing coincidences of all time, and they're I don't know, maybe I'm not in the UK, so it's not as familiar to me, but there are 2 Dennis the Menace cartoons. There's the US one and the UK one, and the weird thing is they are published on the exact same day, and and when they kind of discovered each other and they learned how they created this thing, they decided they would both continue on doing their own strips, because they created these ideas independently of each other. The American or the U.S. Dennis the Menace was kind of based on this guy's kid who was named Dennis, and he was kind of a troublemaker. It was kind of based on his kid. The UK one was based on some old bar song that people would sing called Dennis the Menace of Venice. So, I mean, they each, you could see the inspiration came from different places, but the comic books are quite similar in a lot of ways, but then again, quite different. And you should look them up if you're not familiar with both, and I'll link to the article, but that just goes to show you that, people can kind of come up with these crazy, these ideas with no, with no idea that another person is coming up with something similar. And this happens in Hollywood a lot. I mean, you remember, there was a year where like 2 asteroid movies came out at the same time, and then 2 volcano movies came out at the same time, and then more recently there were 2 movies about a White House siege that came out at the same time. There was, there was a story of like Tombstone, and then Wyatt Earp, and I think not Tarzan, but Jungle Book recently came out, and I think there's another studio developing their own Jungle Book story. So now, of course, those are based on pre-existing properties that are in the public domain and everything. But as far as like the Armageddon and Deep Impact, the 2 asteroid movies, it wasn't, I don't think it was anyone copying, those ideas. I've heard that it probably more likely stemmed from in 1989. Those movies I think came out in 1989, but prior to that, I think it was 97 or whatever. There was, or maybe it was 94. I don't remember. But there was a comet that hit Jupiter, and it was kind of just this thing that was just, they were talking about what if something like that happened to Earth, and it was kind of this thing that was in the zeitgeist. And that's probably what came up with where both of the people came up with the ideas for their asteroid movies. And because it was in the zeitgeist, they probably, fast-tracked these movies, and the amount of time between what happened with the asteroid hitting Jupiter and when the movies came out, it was just kind of that, let's get this is a big thing right now, let's get these movies written and cast and directed and shot and all this stuff, and then get it out there. And that's why those two movies probably more than likely came out at the same. So I'm not sure really that there are any truly original ideas out there, and that's fine as long as you take something and you put your own spin on it and kind of make it your own. And that's why a lot of people, the movie James Cameron Avatar gets a lot of flack for it's Fern Gully in space, or it's Pocahontas in space, or it's just Dances with Wolves in space. Okay, first of all, you just mentioned 3 different movies. No one says Pocahontas is just Fern Gully, or Fern Gully is, Dances with Wolves, or whatever. This is a kind of a tried and true story. And to my knowledge, no one's really taken that idea and said, well, hey, let's set it in space. And I think just doing that added some originality to it. And, and this happens all the time. Kurosawa is like, his films have been redone in so many different ways. And a lot of people just take because the ideas are just, it's really so good. And he probably got those from somewhere else. I don't know. But they'll take let's see. So it's even like Star Wars. It's basically Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress in space. There's even a line, and I don't think George Lucas is. He would admit that. In the fact that the story kind of follows these kind of bumbling fools, in the same respect as it kind of you introduce to R2-D2, and they kind of tell the story, But there's even a line in Star Wars that says, when Darth Vader's choking the one guy, and it says, don't think your sorceress ways, I should know this because I'm a Star Wars freak, but he says they won't help you find the rebels hidden in, before he says fortress, he gets choked out and everything. So there's even a little reference to that, and that's not the only one. Like Magnificent Seven, it's basically Seven Samurai but instead of samurais they make it a war movie. Bug's Life is the same story, but they tell it with bugs. So a lot of these, there's, Fistful of Dollars is Kurosawa's Yojimbo, only as a Western. And that's, to me, that's fine. And I like all those movies for what they are. You gotta like the original because that's the original idea, but it's kind of cool to take something like that and put a different spin on it. So I don't understand so much negativity leveled against Avatar. Maybe it's an easy target because it was so successful and everything. But but anyway, there's you see these, and these are things that works, and they're popular. Now of course we've got so many sequels and everything. But even movies that aren't technically remakes, sometimes they're very similar. Like if you watch Taken with Liam Neeson, and you watch the Commando, Arnold Schwarzenegger's Commando, very similar. Somebody steals his daughter, he goes on a, tracks him down and everything, and there's beat for beat, it's very similar. And then there's movies like, there's like John Wick, and you can compare that to like Death Wish, but they're, again, is, it's a different take, it's a modern take on that type of thing. So you can take an idea that's kind of tried and true that people enjoy and give it your own spin. But most of all, I would say, don't be afraid to put your work out there. And don't be afraid that your ideas are going to get stolen or anything, because and also when you put your ideas out there, the internet's sort of self-policing anyway. So if somebody does like steal your stuff, and it's usually not ideas. Sometimes people take, if you put a logo out there, sometimes they'll get ripped or whatever. But as far as ideas, you can, as creative people, we have our own ideas. So why really bother taking somebody else's idea. Plus the internet, like I said, is self-policing. If somebody sees that somebody stole your ideas, they're going to it's probably going to come back around and everything. So I don't know. Once you get your work out there, it's almost like it becomes copyright once it's published, even if it's just put on the internet. So, you know, not that ideas in itself can be copyright. That's, you know, but you know, characters and things like that can be trademarked and all that. But yeah, don't be afraid to put your stuff out in the world. I mean, and don't be afraid to, you know, be inspired by other things. But, you know, put your own spin on it. You know, I think your voice is going to come through, and that's why, you know, when I picked up this copy of Ghoul Scouts, my initial reaction wasn't, wow, this is. I picked it up because, oh, this is what I like, and I said, oh, this is cool. It's like, you know, it's like my thing. And then I kind of looked at the cover, and I'm like, and then I started seeing a little more similarities. And first I was like, whoa, that's kind of weird. But then, you know, you think about it, and you're like, no, I mean, these guys, they're doing their own thing. I'm doing my own thing. But so yeah, you guys should do your own thing too. Don't be afraid to put your stuff out there. Let your voice shine through. And you know, thanks for listening to this whole thing. I know it probably went a little long, but I haven't really done one of these longer videos in a while. I want to get back to doing some more of those. So, and this is more for people while they're drawing to kind of listen to, because not creating a whole lot while I'm doing it. Just you know, but you know, thanks for, if you like this, thanks for following. If you aren't already subscribed, please subscribe. And yeah, hopefully I'll get some more videos. I really want to start now that the Kickstarter's done and everything, get some more videos out there on sort of a regular basis, and definitely get back to soon doing Young and the Dead. I'm kicking some ideas around, and I'm trying to figure out how to get back into it, how to start this thing off, and I've got story notes and all that stuff. So that stuff's all in the works. So like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you guys later. That is all.